This program, while curated to help you improve your health, contains general advice and should not replace the individual advice of your medical practitioner.
And they found that 170 million Americans had toxic levels of radium in the water supply.
The one thing that came up time and time again was pesticides, very strongly correlated with developmental disorders like autism and ADHD.
The liver is our detoxification superpower organ.
We know estrogens like oral contraceptives, antidepressants, antipsychotics. These have all been identified in post-treatment water.
And I said 30 years ago, it won't be a nuclear bomb that wipes us out. It will be infertility.
In life, it's normal to have ups and downs. But what do we do when we get stuck? I've always been fascinated by the healing journey. Why do some people get better while others fail to make the shift? In Season 2 of The Shift, we explore the intricate world of women's health and help you discover how to balance your hormones and understand yourself better so that you can truly thrive.
The menstrual cycle is a vital sign of female well-being.
My mum just used to say, "Oh, Nan, I'm so sorry. It's part of being a woman."
I would like a call to arms for women to know that their intuition isn't lying to them.
I'm Katherine Maslen, and this is The Shift. There's no doubt about it. We live in a toxic world. Man-made chemicals are now a part of our daily lives. But as recently as a few hundred years ago, the only things in our bodies were made from Mother Nature. Of the approximate 40,000 man-made chemicals approved for use in the US, less than 1% have been tested rigorously for human safety. Every day, more and more research is coming out about how these chemicals can impact our human bodies. And it's very clear that many of the impacts lie in the way that they impact our endocrine function. I've been talking about environmental toxins for years, and when I speak to groups about this, the response is always shock, then overwhelm, which then swiftly moves into decided action once I explain what can be done. In this episode, I'm going to share with you some very disturbing truths about the chemicals you're exposed to every day. But I'm also going to share what you need to do to avoid a huge percentage of them. With a daughter who is 8 years old at the time of production of this series, I want to do everything I can to bring awareness to these toxins and how they're impacting future generations. I hope that the information in this podcast compels you to do the same. So please do pass this on to as many women as you know so that we can get this information out there. Dr. Suzanne Bartlett is a board-certified integrative obstetrician and gynecologist, who is also a facilitator of forest therapy, which we'll hear about more in the next episode. I asked her if she thought that women's health issues were on the rise.
I do think that they're on the increase, and I think that there are a number of reasons why that is the case. I personally believe that we're living in a very toxic soup here in the United States, and particularly in the Midwest where I live, where we have all kinds of chemicals from herbicides to pesticides that we know are endocrine disrupting compounds. And so that is something I'm extremely concerned about. We're seeing a rapid increase in obesity over the last couple of decades in this country, and especially in the Midwest. And as you know, obesity contributes to reproductive problems, everything from PCOS, which is then just one big vicious cycle.
We spoke about the increases in PCOS and endometriosis in the last couple of episodes. And when you look at the research on EDCs, you can see that this is a big piece of the puzzle. EDC stands for endocrine disrupting chemical. And as you can probably gather, they're substances that are known to disrupt the function of the endocrine system. You've heard from integrative gynecologist Dr. Felice Gersh a lot in this series, and here she explains what EDCs are and how they impact us.
So in the body, you have to have these receptors, like I mentioned. Now, these receptors develop during the fetal stage of life. If a human is exposed to endocrine disruptors, these are chemicals in the environment, and they come in all different types. There's so many different endocrine disruptors. Many of them are talked about regarding estrogen. They call them xenoestrogenics. They're chemicals that can affect the function or creation of the receptors for estrogen. But it turns out that there are endocrine disruptors that can work on the melatonin receptors, on the testosterone receptors, probably on every kind of hormone receptor. So that's why it's so important for pregnant women to do everything in their power to try to avoid a lot of chemical toxic exposures, to eat organic foods, to use organic personal care products and cleaning products, and so on. So those are really critical things, is that you only get one chance to make your hormone receptors, and we don't know what to do once they're not functioning properly. If a woman has an endocrine disorder during the time she's pregnant, that can also affect. So if a woman has abnormal production of thyroid, for example, she has hyperthyroidism, that can actually alter the way the thyroid receptors function in the fetus. And of course, that's the future life of the child. If you have too much testosterone being produced in utero, then the baby's testosterone receptors may not work properly. So the exposures of all sorts coming from the mom, as well as from outside chemical sources, that can affect how these receptors develop. And then, of course, like I said, we have to do workarounds because we don't know how to make them over again.
Endocrine disrupting chemicals as a whole is definitely impactful. And unfortunately, gone are the days like as a naturopath when I was trained 30 years ago, we said you need at least 6 months preconception care. Now we realise your preconception care started with your grandmother because of transgenerational effects in utero. So as a group, EDCs are a huge problem. And I think the fact that you've got 1 in 8 Australian women diagnosed with breast cancer is just a pandemic. You know, you didn't see that before in those numbers. And I think EDCs are a big contributing factor to that because the BRCA1 and 2 genes only account for a very small proportion of women who are actually diagnosed with breast cancer, let alone infertility.
That was Nicole Bijma. Nicole is a naturopath researcher, building biologist, and the author of the book Healthy Home, Healthy Family. You'll hear more from her later in the episode. Dr. Ailey Cohen is an integrative medical doctor and the co-author of the textbook of environmental medicine, and also her consumer book Non-Toxic. She's been researching environmental toxicity for over a decade, so I wanted her to explain how these toxins can get into our bodies.
So we have many routes besides our lungs. I'll list a few where chemicals get into the human body. And some of them you may not even be aware of, but we certainly have breathing, which is something we can smell usually, but not often and not always, especially in areas where manufacturing occurs and you don't really smell the odor in the downstream air currents. But we get that through oxygenation. These chemicals ride along into our lungs, and we can actually measure levels of various inhalants. In fact, there's studies that have gone on with air pollution and certain particulate matter. Even in New York City, for instance, they put backpacks on pregnant women to measure the air pollution that they themselves are breathing in, but also possibly fetal inhalation, believe it or not, through the bloodstream. Second way that we often get chemicals into our body is certainly through ingestion, whether it's drinking water with contaminants or with eating food that has any number of food processing chemicals. In this country, we have over 3,000 food additives, which include coloring, preservative, chemicals for mouthfeel or crunch. You know, there's actually chemicals that are added to make you crunch more. There are vitamins that are added. And we also have microplastics and a variety of contaminants that get into food that we didn't want or ask for. So ingestion is a big way of getting chemicals in, and drinking drinks from canned foods. Of course, we get a large amount of BPA or bisphenol A from food packaging. And so that's something to keep in mind is where do you buy your food and how do you want it packaged and how do you even want to carry your food, whether it's in plastic or stainless steel. But we also get exposed through the skin, through cosmetics, through cleaning products that we touch without gloves on or protection. We intentionally add chemicals to our skin when we're using many cosmetics or creams, lotions, aftershave. But also we get exposure through feminine care products. And I think that's something that many people don't really think about. Intravaginally, we get a whole host of chemicals through tampons, for instance, which are often made with rayon and other plastics. They have pesticides from cotton manufacturing. There are plastic casings that are actually considered medical waste and don't even get recycled. So there's a variety of chemicals that get through into our system through that location. And I think young women that are developing really should be paying attention since they will be using a number of feminine care products throughout their lifespan. And these can be really a problem. In the United States, as I mentioned, there's very limited regulation. And so we have over 160,000 water treatment plants that serve about 250 million out of our 310 million residents in the United States. The rest of the water comes from a well supplies, and that's usually serving about anywhere from 20 to 40 million Americans. And so there are issues with contamination of both treatment plants, as I mentioned, the 91 chemicals under the Safe Drinking Water Act, but there's also well water contamination because there's so limited regulation there as well. In fact, homeowners that use wells in the United States do not have to actually test their water for contaminants unless they're actually selling their home. And other than that, people go years without testing their water. So we want to really think about what gets into our drinking water. It can come from anything that falls into bodies of water that will go into these water treatment plants. For instance, lakes, streams, and under the ground is the aquifers. So we have farming chemicals, we have manufacturing chemicals, we even have sewage. Believe it or not, sewage is turned into drinking water and returned to treatment plants. So the things that do not come off of the treatment plant filtration are medications. We know estrogens like oral contraceptives, antidepressants, blood pressure medications, antipsychotics. These have all been actually identified in post-treatment water when it leaves the treatment plant and heads to our homes as drinking water. Also, detergents that are actually added and are required to clean the water, and chlorinated chemicals. These are actually part of water that leaves these treatment plants to go to our homes. And that's why, of course, I recommend filtering at the point of use when it comes through all that piping miles away with all those extra chemicals. That's when you want to filter, is before the point of use, which is your faucet.
If you're curious about your hormonal health, take our quiz. You'll get a report with insights into some key areas you need to look at when it comes to getting your hormones in alignment, as well as some handy tips to get you started. Go to theshiftclinic.com/links. I'd heard along the grapevine that there were birth control drugs in the water supply, so I asked Nicole Bijma what she thought about it.
That's generally a problem if they're going to recycle from sewage contaminants. That's where it's more likely to be an issue from my reading. So that would be more of an issue in things like Dubai or some of the countries in the Mediterranean. Britain, I believe a proportion of their water supply is refiltered sewage water. And that's where the issue is, because once people urinate, obviously that's where a lot of these xenoestrogens are going, in the urine. A lot of the pharmaceutical drugs can be detected in the urine, and prescriptive drugs. In fact, that's quite a useful way to know how much of the proportion of the population are taking drugs, illegal or prescriptive. And many of these are hormone disrupting chemicals, which you actually can't filter. That's the problem. Not even reverse osmosis will filter EDCs out of the water supply, even though that's considered to be the best filter. So drinking water that comes from reconstituted sewage water is actually not recommended for that reason.
So to recap, we can absorb toxins into our bodies through our skin and also through our digestive tract. That means that anything we eat or drink that contains chemicals will have an easy route into our bloodstream and then ultimately to our tissues and organs. For this reason, it is incredibly important to eat organic food where you can and to drink filtered water if possible. But what about the air that we breathe? Does that have any impact on human health? Particulate matter is the term used to describe the tiny particles that are present in the air that we breathe. I asked Dr. Ailey Cohen to explain more.
Particulate matter is based on the size of the particles. And of course, we can't really see them most of the time, but they're listed as sort of ultra particulate matter or particulate matter less than 2.5 microns, I believe it is, in terms of size. And most of the studies are based on this particular size because that's how the instruments can measure the amount of particulate matter that, goes into someone's system, if they're measuring through a backpack or in an enclosed environment. It's interesting, especially now, actually, because we now have a few really important studies from around the world, especially with coronavirus and COVID-19. We now know that there's a much higher association between not only getting coronavirus, in polluted environments such as major cities, but also having a worse outcome from exposure. In other words, not just getting the virus, which many of us will get and never feel it, but really being so inflamed from that environment that they actually go on to have either hospitalization, ventilation, or even death. So pollution is a really critical factor now, and even more so because of coronavirus. In fact, the study that just came out was from the Harvard group, and I believe the number was 20 times the risk for worse outcomes from coronavirus if living in a polluted environment. So it's a pretty serious situation to look at. We also know, and there's many studies showing from Hong Kong and in parts of India, where there's heavy air pollution, that there's higher rates of depression, anxiety, and aggressive behavior, and in the United States, increased risk for hospitalization. So pollution matters, and we need to think about it because that's what we all have to breathe in. So it really needs to be as clean as possible.
Let's look to pesticides again, as this is one that impacts every single one of us.
Well, the things that counts is your pesticides. Again, that's the one that it's outside. You track it through your feet. It's on your clothes. I mean, you think about the amount of pesticides council use to keep nature at bay, and get rid of the weeds and all that sort of stuff. It's everywhere. It's ubiquitous. It's in your body. It's in every living organism on this planet. Plastics breaking down in the ocean and going up the food chain, that's definitely a huge problem now, as we're seeing. So where do you eat? Fish, which is considered to be a good food, but in reality, it's loaded with either toxic metals from oil spills or microbead plastics, etc. So even as I said about the Danish, they were saying 15 years ago, all women of reproductive age should not be ingesting more than one meal of fish a month if they plan to be pregnant. And that was 15 years ago, because it's everywhere, from the Arctic to the Antarctica. It's found in detectable levels in the polar bear livers, and, spraying didn't happen within 15,000 Ks, but you can still detect it in their body. So it's everywhere. What concerns me is also wireless technology and its capacity to potentiate chemicals in our body, because it enhances the blood-brain barrier and suppresses melatonin. So I think the synergistic effect of bombarding our houses with radio frequencies along with chemicals in our water and in our products that people are unwittingly exposing themselves to concerns me. It's the whole toxic load.
Over 5 billion pounds of pesticides are used worldwide each year, and there are many different types. As Nicole mentioned, you can't completely avoid them anymore because they are so pervasive in our environment. DDT has one of the worst stories, and I wanted to dig a little deeper into it. I asked Nicole Bijma what it does in our body.
Well, it targets estrogen receptors, and unfortunately, when it targets those receptors, what it's doing is it not allowing the natural estrogens to combine, and that results in downstream effects that are not what would normally happen when a normal natural estrogen like estradiol would bind to those receptors. Essentially, it blocks that receptor. Problem is, during pregnancy, is that these xenoestrogens, i.e. environmental estrogens like DDT, don't have a high affinity for plasma proteins. So during a stage of the pregnancy, a woman will produce more plasma proteins to enable the estrogens to combine to them, so it protects the fetus from high levels of estrogen. These synthetic estrogens, like in DDT and other things like phthalates, actually don't combine to the plasma protein, so they're getting in through the umbilical cord into the fetus and exposing them to higher levels of these estrogens that would not normally happen if it was a natural estrogen molecule. So that is certainly a concern, and that's probably where a lot of it's being passed from one generation to the other.
Let's now take a look at what can happen when a toxin is distributed widely, using DDT as an example.
DDT seems to literally drive bugs crazy.
The answer to the quest for a poison to eradicate the insects was found in DDT.
DDT next paralyzes, then kills.
Humans emit more than 250 billion tonnes of chemical substances into the environment every year. Along with the threat of climate change, poisoning the planet through man-made chemicals is probably the largest human impact on the Earth, and is also the least regulated and the least understood. The European Chemical Agency estimates that there are 144,000 man-made chemicals in existence, and the US Department of Health estimates that there are 2,000 new chemicals released each year. None of these are tested for human health impacts prior to being used and put into our environment. There is a long history of industry and governments turning a blind eye to these chemicals, and the lack of regulation of man-made chemicals has had catastrophic effects on human health. Let's take a look at DDT, which, although banned in the 1970s, is still wreaking havoc on people's health.
We have to remember that children born today are exposed to these chemicals from birth, perhaps even before birth. Now, what is going to happen to them in adult life as a result of that exposure? We simply don't know.
DDT stands for dichloro-diphenyl trichloroethane, and it belongs to a class of pesticides called organochlorides. It was the first of the modern synthetic insecticides made in the 1940s. It was initially used with great effect for insect control, especially mosquitoes, where it was used to prevent malaria, typhus, and other insect-borne illnesses. It was mainly used to prevent these diseases in the armed forces, but was later introduced for widespread use in homes, workplaces, farms, and gardens. A shocking 1.34 billion tonnes was sprayed across the United States in the years between 1946 and 1962. DDT is classed as a persistent organic pollutant, which means that it persists in the environment, wreaking havoc for years to come. DDT can travel long distances in the atmosphere and has a long half-life in the human body as it accumulates in fatty tissues. It can easily accumulate in the fatty tissues of animals that are exposed to it in a process known as bioaccumulation.
An environmental tragedy is lurking beneath the Pacific Ocean.
A legal battle years ago found the Torrance Company dumped millions of pounds of pesticide into county sewers from the 40s until the 70s.
Very disturbing. A toxic dump site that settled on the ocean floor decades ago continues to wreak havoc on marine life.
That could help biologists understand high levels of DDT in California's sea lions and their startling rate of cancer.
Because of this bioaccumulation, DDT remains in the food chain, moving from fish, shellfish, frogs, rodents to the animals that eat them, and the animals that eat them, and so forth. Not to mention the fish, poultry, and livestock that is eaten by us. The USDA has found DDT breakdown products in 60% of heavy cream samples, 42% of kale samples, and 28% of carrots. Traces can be found in over 99% of humans tested, so it is literally in every body. DDT was universally regarded as safe. It was used to spray neighbourhoods, applied directly to children to prevent lice, and was used heavily on livestock and in farms. After World War II, the use of DDT became more widespread across households. As the use of DDT spread, a handful of scientists noticed that it was causing considerable harm to wildlife populations. These findings were presented in a book called Silent Spring, which outlined the dangers of pesticide use. It was named so due to the decline in songbirds in regions where DDT was heavily used. In the years that followed, scientists began to report that birds with high levels of DDT in their bodies were laying eggs with shells so thin that they broke before hatching, causing a dive in bird populations. There were early concerns for the safety of DDT, but they were largely ignored as the manufacturers advertised the safety of the chemical.
The major claims in Miss Rachel Carson's book, Silent Spring, are gross distortions of the actual facts.
In 1947, Time magazine carried an advertisement claiming DDT was good for people, homes, and farms.
If man were to faithfully follow the teachings of Miss Carson, we would return to the Dark Ages, and the insects and diseases and vermin would once again inherit the earth.
It took 20 years before scientists realized how dangerous it was.
As early as in 1946, Time magazine printed an article saying, quote, "More research is needed before it can be deemed safe for use." Despite these concerns, DDT was still approved for public use. Its use against mosquitoes and other pest insects was very effective in the beginning, and there was a lot of praise for its use. Much research was done on the effectiveness, and there were massive propaganda campaigns to paint DDT in a positive light. In the 1940s and 1950s, public health officials literally sprayed DDT out of hoses onto citizens in public places. But by the 60s, the detriments of DDT to the environment were becoming clear, and evidence of human health impacts were mounting. Countries around the world began to ban its use. DDT has been associated with breast cancer, diabetes, decreased sperm quality, miscarriage risk, and impaired neurodevelopment in children. By 1972, the United States banned the widespread use of DDT, and many other countries have done the same. DDT is, however, still used in some countries for malaria insect control and other approved uses.
Can anyone believe it is possible to lay down such a barrage of poisons on the surface of the earth without making it unfit for all life?
Perhaps what is most alarming is that in a recent study it was found that there are transgenerational effects of DDT exposure. In a study of over 15,000 women, blood samples were taken and assessed for DDT levels. The grandchildren of women exposed to DDT in the 60s were at a higher risk of obesity and early menstruation. Previous studies have also linked transgenerational exposure to breast cancer for women and testicular cancer for men. 99% of humans have detectable DDT in their bodies, despite there being no widespread use for over 40 years. DDT is a chemical that will haunt us for decades to come, and it has clear implications for human health. What is concerning is that while we're now aware that DDT is harmful and we've stopped the use, it has not paved the way for more rigorous safety testing of other chemicals that we'll be routinely exposed to. The products that were sold for everyday use are rife with chemicals that we now have enough evidence to show are harmful to human health. To stop this, change needs to come from the regulatory level, but these chemical manufacturers have so much power. My hope is that by distributing this podcast, we can raise more awareness about these chemicals and demand that our governments and institutions protect our health before the interests of corporations. Another example of this is the story of Monsanto and glyphosate, which you can listen to in episode 9 of The Shift Season 1.
Reviews help us know that we're hitting the mark with what you need and help us to shape future seasons. I'd really appreciate it if you could take a few moments to leave us a review. I would love to know what you think.
The Shift!
Different chemicals have varying degrees of persistence in the environment and in our bodies. Here, Nicole Bijma explains what a half-life is.
It's the time it takes to break down a chemical into half its amount. So if it's gone from 1,000 milligram, it's going down to 500 milligrams. So especially with pesticides, they have very long half-life. So even if it's only a 15-year half-life, it means it's going to be in the soil for at least 100 years. Because every 15 years it's halving itself, but then 15 years later it's halving that and then halving that and halving that. So it actually persists for decades in the soil ecology, especially these pesticides. When I wrote my first paper in the scientific literature on environmental chemicals and their impact on health, the one thing that came up time and time again was pesticides, very strongly correlated with, neurodevelopmental disorders like autism and ADHD and neurodegenerative disorders like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's, because they impact the central nervous system.
Here are some half-lives of chemicals that you're exposed to every day. This is how long your body will take to detoxify half of the chemical in normal circumstances. Phthalates, which are found in fragrances and soft plastics, have a half-life of just 5 hours. This means that when we stop our exposure, our levels will drop quite quickly. Parabens, which are found in cosmetics and skincare products, have a half-life of less than 24 hours. This means that without daily use, we won't accumulate too much in our bodies. BPA, which is found in plastics and also in seafood now, has a half-life of around 5 hours. This is great news, as when we eliminate plastics from your food and water, you can rapidly detoxify this toxin. Polychlorinated biphenyls, or PCBs, are chemicals found in contaminated fish, livestock and poultry. They were used between the 1930s and 1970s in industrial products, engines and sealing compounds, and they are persistent organic pollutants, so they're still present in our food chain. They have a half-life in the human body of about 15 years. PFOA is the substance found in non-stick cookware, such as Teflon. It has a half-life of 3 to 5 years in the body. Teflon stopped using PFOA in 2013 due to safety concerns. However, its replacement chemical, Gen X, is said to have similar impacts. As you can see, there are many chemicals that can accumulate in our bodies for years to come. This is why it is so important to address what you can do to reduce your exposures right now. If you stop buying products with these chemicals, then manufacturers will stop using them. I cover this in more detail in my environmental toxicity masterclass, where we have some more practical tips on what you can do to detox your daily life. You can access the masterclass at theshiftclinic.com. We've covered a lot about endocrine disrupting chemicals, but is there anything else that could be impacting human health? Dr. Jade Davidson is known as the Lyme Guy, and I asked him what other environmental factors might contribute to chronic diseases like Lyme disease.
I would say the number one toxin that is not discussed enough is radioactive elements. And sometimes people say radiation, but I hesitate on saying radiation because it's easy to think, oh, that's Wi-Fi, that's Bluetooth, that's like the EMF radiation, because that's the non-ionizing form of radiation. But the ionizing form of radiation is radioactive elements like cesium, radium, uranium, thorium, these chemicals that are found in our water supply that are very much more damaging than heavy metals are and just wreak havoc on our mitochondria, wreak havoc on our hormones in our body. Like, for instance, the Environmental Working Group did research and they surveyed the water wells in America and the water treatment plants, if you will. And they found that 170 million Americans, so half the population, had toxic levels of radium in the water supply. The state of Texas, 80% of them had toxic levels of radium in the water supply. Texas is a huge state in America. And how many labs are actually able to test radium right now? Very few. But radium essentially is a bone seeker, so it likes calcium. So where people talk about osteoporosis and lead, or lead likes calcium and compete in the bone, it's really radium that is a very strong competition for calcium, kicks that out. But a radioactive element actually gives off damaging energy consistently. So imagine standing next to a campfire. You're like, oh, that feels good, nice and warm. Now take a coal that's in that hot fire and swallow it. That's essentially what radioactive elements are, that they're going to continually emit energy that's going to damage our DNA, that's going to damage the mitochondria. And as soon as you damage the mitochondria, you're shutting off the whole hormone sequence from the get-go. But it's also suppressing the immune system. So people that are getting Lyme disease, like in America, there's an area in the Midwest, Minnesota, Wisconsin, Illinois, where there's a lot of Lyme disease, if you will. It's a certain bacteria infection. And there's an area in Wisconsin that's called the radium belt, where it has very high amounts of radium in it. And it's like, I wonder why so many people are getting Lyme disease in certain areas. Could it be actually the underlying radioactive elements that they're drinking or exposed to that then is lowering the immune system, so any bug they're around, they catch, and then it, turns into a cascade.
In the last episode, we spoke about the fact that so many environmental toxins we're exposed to are xenoestrogens. Xenoestrogens can act like estrogen and impair our receptor function, as Dr. Felice Gersh mentioned earlier. I asked Dr. Ailey Cohen to talk about some of the most common xenoestrogenic chemicals and where we can find them.
So we know, for instance, that the most robust data really comes from several classes of chemicals. So I'll start by listing them. One is the bisphenols, which includes BPA. Many of your audience members may have heard of BPA being taken out of baby bottles, at least in the US from 2012. And that was because it is a classic endocrine disruptor in the sense that it acts like a low-level estrogen. And it affects not only the estrogen levels, but also the estrogen receptors. So we know that people who are exposed to bisphenol A can have a whole range of effects in terms of onset of menarche, of course, but also even in lab studies, we know that it can affect fetal changes in males, similar to the way another group of chemicals called phthalates can work like an endocrine disruptor. Bisphenol A has had some of the most robust studies of all the different classes. And now there's also substitutes for BPA, BPS, BPFIP, PPF. And so many of these bisphenols which are in canned foods. They line the inside. There are epoxy resins that line the inside of many cans. They're on printed materials like airplane tickets and parking tickets in the ink process. So BPA is quite pervasive and actually one of the most pervasive industrial chemicals. Other groups of chemicals within the endocrine disrupting category would include phthalates, and phthalates are typically chemicals that make plastics squishy and soft. BPA tends to make plastics hard. Think plastic bottles for medication bottles, for instance. Phthalates, on the other hand, are actually used to make things squishy. So, hairsprays have phthalates in order to make your hair not brittle. Vinyl has phthalates. Vinyl is a soft plastic in a whole host of products in our home, in our cookware. It's also a nail polish because we don't want our nail polish to break. So phthalates are also a very well-studied group, and they have a host of health effects that are associated with them, including, of course, developmental risk, changes in little boys, newborns in terms of their genitalia, but also, of course, infertility risks as well. Flame retardants are another well-studied group of endocrine disruptors, and they've had a long and kind of torrid history in the United States in terms of kind of whack-a-mole, getting rid of the bad ones, and then, of course, another substitute comes along. So those are just a few of the groups of chemicals that are listed under endocrine disruptors, but there's also several pesticides that we now know, and we know certain heavy metals can actually act as endocrine disruptors as well.
When I talk about environmental toxins, it can be very doom and gloom, as we're facing such an avalanche of these toxins every day. You can, however, do quite a lot to control your exposures and use your wallet to vote for the ban of toxic chemicals in everyday products. Here is some practical advice, first from Nicole Bijma and then Dr. Cohen, about what you can do to reduce your exposures now.
The magnitude of the problem is enormous. From a consumer's perspective, I'd just say, just don't put stuff on your face and your skin. Like most of these products contain preservatives, which are pesticides to stop the moisturizer going off. And that pesticide is affecting your skin microbiome. It's exposing you to phthalates and hormone-disrupting chemicals through perfume. Don't get sucked into the propaganda of this ageless skincare, etc. Go back to basics for products still in their natural state, like natural oils and seed and nut oils and oils used in Polynesia, with women with these beautiful hair and skin. They're just using natural plant-based oils, which are fantastic for beauty, but for some reason, it doesn't drive the dividends for a multi-trillion-dollar industry, which perfumes and cosmetics are. And people don't realise what impact that has on their skin and certainly on their health. So it's really about educating, really thinking twice about what you buy, how you clean the home, you use your microfiber cloths and get fresh air into the home. I live in quite a bushy environment, so that the trees become the lungs of the area around me as opposed to me and my kids. Being mindful about the building materials, how you renovate, that you reduce the amount of toxins coming into the house. It's really quite common sense. You just have to provide the evidence, and people go, oh, that makes sense. Just don't get sucked into the propaganda to buy stuff that you don't need.
So I start with number one, don't buy it to begin with. In other words, start with your home environment and say to yourself, do I really need an air freshener, carpet cleaner? Do I really need all of these added cleaners? Because I think by not purchasing them, you not only save money, but you also save yourself from all of the chemicals that not just dry off and evaporate into your home, but they end up in the dust in your home. Your pets are licking their paws and they're getting these chemicals on their paws and into their bodies. Your children, when they're playing with toys, will often have dust on things that they pop into their mouth. So I say the less is more approach, as I mentioned. Don't buy it to begin with. Don't buy too many cleaning chemicals and just limit yourself to just a handful, maybe even fewer than a handful. You can make cleaning products, for instance, from just Castile soap, from white vinegar, real lemon juice, sea salt for scrubbing. In addition, other low-hanging fruit that I think about is, well, what are we eating and drinking? Because if we can limit the amount of chemicals that we get just from eating and drinking, that's a huge amount of chemicals, particularly drinking water. Drinking water to me is one of the most undervalued and most important area of contamination in our bodies. And it's something that I really do feel strongly about. I feel that everyone really should filter their water. And there's a variety of types of ways to do that. But, I really think that the most aggressive way that you can clean drinking water is through a process through reverse osmosis. And these are not expensive setups anymore. They only run a couple $100s. You can also use pitchers that are carbon filters. And we go through each of those and where you can really look them up and get good products. But filtering water, especially in our country where there's just so limited regulation, there's only 91 chemicals in the United States that are actually managed, regulated at treatment plants under the Safe Drinking Water Act of 1974. So we're using old laws to manage chemicals that are up to almost 90,000 that can get into our drinking water. So I really emphasize filtering your water and doing that well, carrying your water in glass and stainless steel. Food as well. Food can be cleaner. I think many of us know how to do that, but really sticking to less processed foods is a good way to start. And then also I talk about habits, really working on habits, things you do every day. So I drink tea every morning. I happen to not be a coffee drinker, but a really avid tea drinker. And I've figured out that really heating tea that's not organic up to very high temperatures is probably going to release a lot of chemicals from growing, from manufacturing, all the pesticides. And so I look to cleaner products for things that I do every single day. And I think that's a good place to start.
Some great advice there from our experts. The other big piece of advice that I would like to add to this is to eat organic or pesticide-free food wherever possible. We have to go back to nature, and when you're choosing what to eat, think about the nutrition that's in the food, but also any extras that you might not want in there. A great resource for this is the environmental working groups Dirty Dozen and Clean 15. It's a list that is released every year with the fruit and vegetables that are highest in pesticides and lowest in pesticides. This can help you make better choices if you aren't able to source organic food. Go to ewg.org to find out more. From a naturopathic perspective, if I have someone sitting in front of me that has health issues, I'm always considering their current toxic load. In addition to their inevitable exposures, I'm interested in assessing how their detoxification pathways work. Your organs of detoxification include your kidneys, liver, gut, lymphatic system, and skin. Dr. Vincent Pedre, Integrative MD, explains.
The liver is our detoxification superpower organ. So it is one of the main organs of detoxification along with the kidneys that filters the blood and then releases toxins and metabolites in urine. But the liver is the main organ of detoxification. In fact, when you absorb food and nutrients from the gut, a lot of them go through the portal circulation straight to the liver where they get metabolized. The liver is kind of screening what's coming into the body from the gut and make sure to try to protect the body from toxins. For example, there are 2 phases to this detox process in the liver. I think when people are talking about detoxification, they're usually talking about one big thing, and I think most people don't understand that detoxification is actually separated into 2 very important steps, and we call them phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification. And phase 1 is run by a whole bunch of enzymes that are powered by things like the P450 system. And if you ever read papers, you might hear about the 1A1B and the 1C and all these different P450 enzymes that process things like estrogens, for example, where they process xenoestrogens and they're processing out medications. So one of the reasons that if you take a medication that you have to keep taking it every day is because the body processes the medication out. It's getting detoxified by the liver and then pushed out of the body as a metabolite. Now, this phase 1 liver detox enzymes, they're highly inducible. And what that means is they are super fast. And if they need to run faster, they can be upregulated up to 500 times and they produce an intermediate. So they're basically taking whatever substance needs to be metabolized and putting a tag on it. Now, the thing is that these tags that they put on the substance that gets processed through phase 1 is actually highly reactive and it can cause DNA damage. So think of it as a reactive free radical intermediate. It's almost like they're scratching the surface of the substance, applying this tag. So now the substance is ready to receive the anchor that will allow it to be excreted. So it's almost like they're adding a hook that the anchor can be attached to, and the anchor is that final step. So when I talked about the anchor, I'm talking about phase 2, where that reactive intermediate is getting tagged with this anchor. So it's getting attached, and now it becomes water soluble, and it can be excreted in the bile or through the urine. The problem is that phase 1, as I said, is highly inducible. So there's a lot of nutrients that can support it: B vitamins, magnesium, green tea. A lot of the kind of typical things we think of in detoxification can power that first phase of detoxification. But phase 2 is really slow, and it takes a while to induce. So the problem is that some people run into when they do a detox, or if they do some sort of fast or water fast or whatever it is, what may happen is that their phase 2 is not running fast enough, and they start accumulating phase 1 intermediates. And you can get those symptoms of detoxification like headaches and nausea, fatigue, dizziness. Phase 2 is dependent on amino acids. So it needs amino acids like lysine, taurine, and cysteine. And what they do is they help power 6 different enzymes that are there to create water-soluble final reacted substances that then can get excreted from the body, whether it's through the bile or through the urine. So it's very important to understand that liver detoxification is a complex process. It is a highly energy-intensive process. So for anyone that has mitochondrial issues, energy problems, then their liver detoxification can get bogged down because it does need a lot of energy. And then the liver by itself can't detox the body, It has to work in conjunction with the gut microbiome as well as the digestive tract. So if you're secreting bile, but you're constipated, then that allows those toxins to sit in your gut for way too long, and over time, they can start to recirculate back into the body. So part of detoxification is not just knowing how to support phase 1 and phase 2 liver detox, but also making sure that you're having regular bowel movements. I mean, just think about it. If you've ever been constipated, anyone who's ever been constipated, once you go to the bathroom, like how well you feel afterwards, because you're releasing processed chemical substances that need to exit the body. It's just good for the body to do that. And part of what assists us is when you have a balanced microbiome. I talked about how microbiome imbalance can, through an enzyme, release estrogen back into the circulation and lead to estrogen dominance. So a balanced gut microbiome can really play an important and significant role in detoxification, which I think a lot of people don't realize the importance of the gut, the liver, and the gut microbiome as a triad that together plays a really significant role in the ability to detoxify, which includes our ability to balance our own hormones.
I'm a really big advocate of doing a 2 to 4 week detox every year to reset and assist your body in eliminating these chemicals. I talk about this more in my book, Get Well, Stay Well, where I also have 7, 14 and 21 day detox plans. You might be wondering right now, if all of this research is out there, why aren't we seeing more change? Why is it that 95% of the personal care aisle at the supermarket is still full of toxic products? I asked Nicole Bijma what she thought.
I think with the human condition, until people have that personal experience, only then is it on their radar. So unless it happens to you, a lot of people aren't thinking about it. Like when you're young and you're not thinking about having kids, you don't care. It's not on your radar, you know what I mean? So, but as a population, as species, I mean, I was telling my students about this, naturopathic students, because I was lecturing at uni for quite some time. And I said 30 years ago, it won't be a nuclear bomb that wipes us out. It will be infertility, because you can't expect to expose the population to hundreds of thousands of chemicals whose synergistic effect we haven't even got an idea on, because the way science assesses and regulates chemicals isn't adequate. Until we get these large sets of data and metabolomics, only then are we going to be able to have an idea of the magnitude, and often then it's too late. So in terms of getting it on people's radar, I think until they actually try and have kids and they have problems, only then does it become an issue that they're concerned about. But I believe we do need to get this to authorities to act as soon as possible, because from what I can see with Food Standard Australia's NICNAS, National Industrial Chemical Notification Assessment Scheme, and all these other regulatory bodies in Australia, they are not taking this seriously and they're doing very little. In fact, we don't even do testing in Australia. We wait until the testing is done in Europe or other countries. Then we benchmark it as something that we need to look at, which can take years. And then even then, after it's been banned for 12, 15, 20 years in Europe, they still might allow it, as we did with triclosan, for example, which causes thyroid-related anomalies. I mean, it's just insane. And that's why I wrote the book and started the college to go, guys, we have to act now. The revolution has to happen from the ground up in the family home.
Toxic load is a stress on the body. When we are also chronically stressed, this leads to the perfect storm for disease development, and it is no wonder that most of our population is not thriving. Dr. Robin Murphy is a naturopathic doctor, and I wanted to ask her what the impacts of stress were on the situation.
Well, I think it's important to even just define stress because it's not just the typical stress that we think of psychological stress. There's also stress on the body related to circadian disruption and sleep deprivation. There's stress that we see from pathogens and infections, from toxicants and pollutants, even nutritional stress. So the composition of our food and nutrient status, even food restrictions, all can be considered sources of physiological stress. So there's acute stress, short term, is actually shown to improve the cellular response and defense processes and longevity, whereas prolonged stress, or what we would say as toxic stress, tends to overwhelm the compensatory response and shortens lifespan.
We're going to talk more about stress in the next episode, and it's such a huge topic that we've split it into 2 parts to make it easier to digest for you. To close off this conversation on environmental toxicity and its impact on human health, I'd like to ask you a favour. The only way that we will change this is from the ground up, and if we don't demand change, our health and the health of future generations will suffer. We're already seeing the significant health detriments and the explosion of hormonal issues and infertility directly from the use of these chemicals. I'm really concerned about what life will be like for my daughter and our children if we don't act now. So, what can you do? You can begin by taking inventory of what you're exposed to. Then you'll need to source some natural alternatives. There are so many amazing companies that are producing lovely products that are just as effective and kinder to you and the environment. If you're budgeted, I'd ask you to consider what you're consuming, and if you even need it. Maybe you could use less toothpaste, less shampoo, less cleaning products. Maybe you can cut back on your use, which means you're not spending more overall when you switch to natural products. Plastics are not only a health hazard, but they are severely impacting our planet, and we need to stop using them. There are over 5 trillion pieces of plastic in the ocean, which will be there for generations to come. We need to act now to help ourselves and the planet. Your health is dependent on living on a healthy planet, and reducing plastic will help us both. Lastly, please share this podcast. You can do this by messaging a friend or posting on social media. If you visit the Shift Clinic Instagram or Facebook pages, you'll find a heap of quotes, audiograms, and other content that is super easy to share.
Coming up on The Shift.
Every generation, of course, has had stress, but never before has it been so constant and so relentless.
I give the example of the pandemic. We barely did anything all year. However, we were more stressed and burnout than ever.
It's perceptions of pressure and urgency, and it's worrying about what other people think of us.
The technological age has not reduced stress, but in many ways added to our stress.
And it's that chronic stress where your body is feeling these signals of the lion or the tiger in the jungle chasing you.
This series is a production of The Shift Clinic, hosted by Katherine Maslen. Music and sound design by Shade Furlong. Thank you to all of our experts. For more details on them, go to theshiftclinic.com.
We can be. We must be.
The first generation to end extreme poverty.
The generation most determined to fight injustice and inequality.
The generation that saves the planet
from climate change.
And this is how we will get it done.
The global goals.
A 15-year plan for everyone, everywhere.
With no one left behind.
The global goals are a framework that collectively help us
support the health of our people
and the planet.
At Shift, we are ambassadors for the global goals.
This project supports global goal number 6.
Clean water and sanitation.
Every time you listen
to an episode of The Shift,
we provide a day's access to clean water
for a human in need
in Malawi, Africa.
Water is the foundation to health, and we believe
every human should have access
to clean, healthy water.
So please share this podcast wide
and keep tuning in
so we can impact those who need it the most.